Hello again and welcome. I'm Nicole Springer, Chief Equity Officer and Senior Director of Professional Development and Scholarship with Campus Compact. We are excited about our partnership with the Academy of Community Engagement Scholarship as co-creators of this series. ACES is an organization that recognizes exceptional leaders who live at the intersection of academics and communities to benefit society. Together, we bring you this series on addressing wicked issues through community engaged scholarship. This year, our focus is on youth and gun violence, exploring the context, root causes, and how higher education can respond. Today's focus is anchor strategy and community partnerships. Leading the charge is Campus Compact's Wicked Issues Fellow, Dr. Camille Williamson. So without further delay, I will hand this over to Dr. Williamson.
Thank you so much, Dr. Springer. It's lovely to be here again. Welcome, everyone, to our fifth webinar, Exploring Youth and Gun Violence as a Wicked Issue. Today, I am joined by three extraordinary panelists, and I'm happy to introduce them and get started. Our first panelist, Ms. Deborah Wesley, serves as the founding president of Sinai Community Institute, established in 1993. She also serves as Executive Vice President for Community Outreach on behalf of Sinai Health System. Sinai Community Institute is a health system-based human and health services organization that has touched over 565,000 individuals through its 70-plus programs since its creation. She is a social entrepreneur, leader, and community builder. Ms. Wesley has developed innovative community-based programs that have received national recognition. These programs have helped to develop the potential of children and youth, build strong community partnerships, support strong, healthy families, improve community health outcomes, and enhance economic opportunities. Our second panelist is Chasta Martin. And over the past 20 years, Chasta has sought to disrupt issues of inequity and improve service provision within the areas of education reform, health, social enterprise, violence prevention, and workforce development. With an unrelenting regard to strengthen the capacity of human service organizations, Chasta is honored to have had the opportunity to design initiatives impacting 180 public schools, launch 5 hub of service locations, design impact initiatives, manage evidence-based interventions, and build up organizational strategy, culture, and leadership. And our third panelist for today is Atara B. Young, who is of AB Young Consulting, LLC's founder and lead consultant, which is a firm rooted in social justice, equity, and healing. With over 20 years of experience spanning public health, trauma-informed care, violence prevention, and youth development, Atara brings visionary leadership and community-based practice to every contract, training, and program that she leads. Atara is a proud native of Chicago's Englewood community with a commitment to social change, which began in her undergraduate years at Xavier University of Louisiana, where she developed an urban Girl Scouting initiative and helped organize against the political rise of David Duke. And she has never stopped organizing. After graduating with a BA in political science and pre-law, she joined City Year Boston, later helping to launch a Chicago site as well. Welcome, everyone. I'm excited to get into our discussion today. And our first question, and we asked this of most of the panelists that have been with us on previous webinars, how do you become interested in the wicked problem of youth and gun violence? Ms. Wesley, would you like to start us off?
Well, when I saw the question, unfortunately, it is a personal experience for me where I have over the years, lost loved ones due to gun violence. And it has definitely impacted the lens by which I see things. The other thing is I live in a community that, sometimes you hear the shooting going on, and it is very present in my life. Don't like it to be, but it is what it is. And so there is the term never forget. Gun violence is such in some of our communities where you can't forget it. You have to be aware of it and still figure out how you live through it and what you can do about it. So for me, it is a personal challenge, but also it's been something professionally in terms of things that I wanted to, if you want to see change, you create change. I'm not waiting for someone to do that for me. So, which is why I'm so glad I was able to engage Chasta in some of my vision. Sometimes I call it delusion, but it is important to to have the North Star, and how can the lives of our children change, and our family? What can we do? What can I do? And I always start with I. So for me to answer the question, it has been very personal.
Hmm. It sounds like it's personal, but also inspirational for the work that you lead. Mhm.
Yes, yes.
And Miss Wesley mentioned Shasta helping to bring that vision to fruition. What sparked your engagement?
In violence in general, like youth, youth.
Mhm,
I mean, it's hard to um, not be surrounded by violence when you live in America over the past 40 plus years.
mhm,
Um, but I think specifically, I'm real concerned about the extinction of blacks ultimately in this country. And I look at, I think there's always that demographic that you look at to determine if a community is healthy, if the future prospect looks great, and that's that 18 and 26-year-old, age group. And in every civilization, that age group influences future growth, prosperity, right, health, so on and so forth. I mean, urban planners even use it to determine which assets get developed in communities. And
mhm,
you got townships in Africa who literally greet each other by saying, "How are the children?" Right? Because it's that one marker to help you understand if the community is healthy or not. Well, when I look at America, 18 to 26-year-old black men disproportionately are incarcerated, and two, they're murdered by guns. And
mhm.
so, this is what caused me to really lock in on this social issue. I mean, there are a lot of different social problems that pique my interest, but at the end of the day, I got black children that I want to see live. And we've placed roots in this country, and so we're going to continue to invest and see it through, for now at least. And while I am of working age, I'm going to commit to trying to make sure that future is secure for them. So ultimately, that was the why.
I appreciate that, especially in the context of understanding that community's health is measured in how the children are doing, and I don't think that we look at that enough. Atara, can you share with us what sparked your engagement?
Um, particularly in youth violence.
Mhm,
I got 3 brothers, 3 uncles, 3 sons. Um, and the violence happens to everyone, women and men. Um, but the only people I ever knew who got like murdered or shot at the time were men. Um, and I think I'm sorry Vanessa Wesley is not here as well, but I think the first thing was Yummy Sandifer, right? Like I didn't understand. I don't think I could contextualize what was happening to in our city until I began to understand that story.
could you share the story?
And um it was a young boy who was murdered. And if I'm missing any of the details, it's in my nervousness and people can correct me, but I want to keep it as brief as possible.
Mhm,
But and he had committed a crime, a murder, and they were murdering him. And I believe the person who murdered him was also a young person. So it's like this web of um, harm and violence happening to children. And then the criminalization of children, understanding that they were criminalizing a child, and the lack of seeing any person who was a child in that whole scenario as a whole human being. And I
mhm,
saw people in my community um, using dehumanizing language towards a child. And it just woke up something in me that was like, there's something, because until that point, even growing up in Inglewood, I don't have stories of like crime and violence. I have stories of running up and down 75th Street from block to block, from Union to Lowell to Halsted, running in Black businesses, John's Hardware, Us, Pizzeria, the Black-owned liquor store. So up until that point in my life, um, violence to me was having a fight on the block and then you making up next week through a dance battle or something. But when that happened, I was like, whoa, it's some bigger stuff out here. And how we look at kids and treat children is an injustice. So that was my first kind of awakening. Like I got to be a part of doing something about what this looks like in my community.
I really appreciate you. And for those who may not be from Chicago, some of those street names are streets on the south side of Chicago. I really appreciate you contextualizing also in a lot of neighborhoods, people don't necessarily have this constant experience of gun violence. In neighborhoods, there are layers of community that include support for young people, that include Black businesses, that include things that should also be supported and shepherded, not only for the community itself, but for the thriving of young people. So I appreciate you contextualizing that, Atara. And you also mentioned that it awakened you to start thinking about some things that you should do to get involved. So I want to shift our discussion a little bit to ask the panelists, what are some action steps or projects or initiatives that you have driven or you are driving to address this wicked issue? And we can start with you, Chasta.
Sure, and thank you. I'll pick up on where Deborah kind of left off, which talking about some of the vision work that she has been really developing through the Sinai Health System, in particular, Sinai Community Institute. For years, I think there's been an interest in taking all the various assets throughout that health system and saying, how can we, I mean, we know about the social determinants of health and all of the ills that, right? But how can we focus on a major social problem that we have the capacity to address, in particular, domestic and gun violence, and make sure that from our emergency room to nursing throughout all departments, that everyone has a singular focus to make sure that we're serving very well in those two issues. And so there's this concept of the West Side Trauma and Resiliency Center. That name is still under development, but essentially Deborah's flagged senior leadership at the health system to say figure it out in 2 years. And she's working with the intergovernmental affairs side of the house and the private philanthropy side of the house to raise the funds to make that vision a reality. But in terms of the now, you're looking at very strategic planning processes that are assessing the assets inside of that health system, understanding the problem deeper, like why are so many of us impacted by these issues in particular, not just from a daily lifestyle and an environmental standpoint, but how does that whole ecosystem play in causing the problems that we're seeing? So that project is very much underway, and the beauty about it is that it's become catalytic, and so you're seeing other departments look at this issue, go after funding, and say, all right, let's launch, let's do a soft launch, as we're building up this roadway for 2 years. And so that's a beautiful project that is very much underway. And I would say, I mean, if you kind of zoom out and just talking about the ecosystem of community violence interventions in Chicago, it's unprecedented. I mean, if you look at the investment that Chicago has made since 2016 or so, you've had major initiatives pop up, and they're well funded. They're pulling civic and business leaders together to say, hey, let's connect jobs to this population that has been forgotten, that has been pushed out of pro-social institutions that are for their development and not for their degradation. And so there's been a there's been a lot of intentional investment, and you're seeing other cities look at components of some of these successful interventions, and they're combining cognitive behavioral interventions, they're combining rapid employment, and the wraparound supports that we all know are really important to get connected to help you stay in any intervention or any program that's worthwhile. So those are, I think, the top of the mind initiatives related to this issue. There's a whole lot more, but I know in the interest of time and other panelists, that's about what I'd offer for now.
Thank you, Chasta. Ms. Wesley, I'd love to hear more about your inspiration for this vision that you set for the course of this roadmap for the next 2 years.
Well, Sinai is a trauma center. So I don't know if there's a day that passed when there isn't some kind of violence that's occurred that they don't come to Mount Sinai for emergency care.
Mhm.
That being said, we're a large system. And I think the beauty of it is that unfortunately, we work in silos to some extent. You have the behavioral health piece, you have the community health, you have all the clinical supports that go into it, and all the aftercare. So my vision is we've got to come together and work hand in hand on not just we want to make sure that they survive, number one, but survival is beyond just the medical condition. It's the emotional condition. It's also the what I consider is are the family members and the community members that are impacted by this. And so if we could work together collaboratively, starting with understanding all the assets that sit there. So it doesn't have to be a daunting challenge because there are resources. And what we want to do is identify those gaps and also make sure that the community is at the table. We have a system and partnerships with different community outreach folks who come into the emergency room and just trying to make sense out of and make sure it's not chaotic. Because oftentimes we did a study some years ago, which I promised Chaz that I would get to it, but to follow those victims of violence, particularly those young people who are coming to our emergency room and then following them into the community, because there was a big concern around the repeat victimization. They were coming right back. So it's like this cycle. Part of Sinai includes our rehab center, so Schwab Rehab. So if you go into the rehab, I grew up in a time where rehab, you're thinking about somebody who's had a stroke or some kind of an older person, right? No, you're seeing young people who have to redefine their lives because they may be permanently disabled, either where they are in a wheelchair. There's a young man recently; he's permanently blind, and all those issues in terms of how is life going to be for him when he goes back home, in a community like North Londo, and I would say for Inglewood, and a lot of these are older communities with older homes, and so being able to adapt and for individuals and give them a sense of hope. Yes, things have changed, but we're going to work hand in hand with you on that. So I feel that is through having this kind of network, this west focus on the west side, because there's one on the south side, but on the west side is looking at wrapping our arms around the resources that are there, identifying where the gaps are, but also embracing the community and the I want to say the collateral damage, if you will, as a result of the violence. So that's my vision. It is unfortunately, with all the changes that are going on in our government, we have to build a kind of a more compelling case, if you will, for some of the funding. But I can tell you, based on what Shasta has done over the past 6 months, folks are leaning in. And I will finally say that we have to honor everyone's different strengths. There are some professions that are built on them being inside the four walls. That's how they operate, particularly a clinical person. But then there are other professions where I love being a social worker. I love being to be at the table with the community and different venues. So the ability to create Sinai Community Institute was to say to the board is the way that we're operating, and this was almost 33 years ago, is we're treating the cuts that you see, but there are cuts that you don't see. And so I want us to really be very intentional in terms of being at the table with our community and understanding the dynamics of of the ecosystem, and really being able to help them be well and get well and understand the resources that are in our community. So you cannot say to someone, I'm going to discharge you. I need you to go to the to the Walgreens, was just closed in our community, right?
Mhm.
So there are things that we know, and we have to kind of position ourselves to understand and level set for our community and for our providers on how we, have a more cohesive system of care. So that's the inspiration.
Mm. Thank you for sharing that. And it sounds like you're taking a very intentional approach of community engagement for this process.
Absolutely.
I appreciate that. And I know it's hard. That's something that's very important to you as well.
Yeah.
Can you share some initiatives you're working on?
Oh, wow. Gosh, I just want to say, let's start off by saying community practice to me is the foundation of the ecological model, right? And when you're dealing with so many complex levels, it has to be that. And so many of the projects that I'm engaged in are community level projects. And so I haven't worked, I think I've worked at other places like City Year. And City Year was traditionally a project that was for young people who wanted to volunteer. And so many of the students who were first in City Year when I arrived there years ago in Boston as a as a recruit were students from Ivy League colleges who wanted to volunteer in African American communities or challenged impoverished communities. Your typical kind of format. And when I came in, my job, I made my job to recruit more people of color from Boston communities, having had not come from Boston. And there was a gentleman already in Boston who was doing that, and he started the Roxbury Center, so I had the chance to go there. And when we brought the project here, it was very important that I be able to reach all types of young people of color to inform this process. And I reached out to people who had been in violent engagements in their life. I reached out to students who had went to college for the first year but weren't able to fund that second year, who had also
Mhm.
come from families that were, struggling families. Because when you say from violence, there is structural violence, there's violence that is put up on our communities. And then there are people in our communities who have experienced gun violence. Directly, somebody in their family has been shot, they've been shot. So there's all types of, violence we could discuss. So I really put an emphasis on that. And that was the beginning of intentionality around it. And then when you say 20 years, I almost died. When you said 20 years of work, I was like, I've been doing this for 20 years. But currently I have the great opportunity to work with the project called Free Root Operation, which is run by a young woman named Eva. And she works with women who have had proximity to gun violence. And so currently I have the opportunity to do two things there. I provide clinical support. I serve as a clinician, working with mothers who have lost their children, or whoever, or whatever their relationship is to proximity to violence. But I also have the opportunity to then also evaluate the program and provide critical context into their curriculum. And that also has been amazing to watch them formulate a ecological model, a framework around this work, particularly for women as the window to families. So looking at those women, working with women as individuals and in groups, and then also sharing that information with their families and creating stability, emotional stability, economic stability, all those things. So that's the work that I'm doing now. And then, I also have the chance to teach at Metropolitan Peace Academy and some other agencies that provide supportive services addressing violence prevention in our communities. Also having come from the previous ceasefire under the leadership of Mark Payne. That's some of the work I'm doing. But there's two things I do want to share. Well, I think I shared one, and that was there's the importance of community practice across everything we do. And I really love to hear that, especially in Deborah's presentation of her work with Sinai, because it has been the most effective structure to me in dealing with these issues across all agencies that I've worked with who have had success.
I agree. And I think that's something that is a tenet of, or is essential for anything to stick. Without community engagement, without community buy-in, without
Yep.
making community co-architects, it's very hard to make things stick. And sometimes we've had experiences, specifically in Chicago, where an administration has brought in something that worked in Philadelphia or worked in California, and it did not stick here
No.
because this isn't Philadelphia and this isn't California. And it is important because I think what we're getting to the heart of the matter here is, what is the relationship that we have with the communities that we say we want to help um, uh, not only survive but thrive, not only heal but progress. And I really appreciate that baseline that the panelists are setting today. And I'm just curious, with all of the work that you're doing, what has been your experience of addressing this particular wicked issue in partnership with colleges and universities? And I'd specifically like for you to point out what have been the successes and what have been the challenges. And I'd like to hear from you first, Ms. Wesley, because I know you and I have sat across the table many a time. You're muted though. It's okay.
Kind of thing. Yeah, I've been fortunate where I have a strong partnership with the Princeton 55 program. So where literally we have a young person who's just graduated from Princeton who spends a year with us. And so like this project that we're talking about, they're getting such a rich experience in terms of working on this issue in our community. I think we can do a much better job, be real clear about that, that there are opportunities. I mean, there are things that I'm trying to do that I have to stretch my brain to figure out, and I would love to have this academic component to work along with us. I mean, the thing is that one of the projects I'm working on, which I'm real excited about, is I have partnered with Microsoft to develop an app that's called It's Personal, and it was developed in with the community, and it is a self-administered health risk assessment and social determinants of health application. It is so exciting, but in order to do this, what we did is we looked at the data for each of the communities, because every community is not the same. So we're starting in North Lawndale in terms of what are some of the contributors to the life expectancy gap, which is significant there. And so, but we also wanted to know, what are the issues important to you, so that we can build it into the tool. And it has been a labor of love, very painful, but there from an academic point of view, it would be great to have someone maybe from the business school, if you will, because in social work, we're touchy-feely people. We want to, you know, change lives, but then there's also the business aspect of it. And so I've had to work on that, the legal aspect, because of the, when you release something like this, you want to make sure that you're protecting the user, the end user, and everything very strongly. And I just feel like there are opportunities um, to really align ourselves closer uh, with the universities or the academic environment. What I don't think is good is having an intern for a month or 2 months. It just doesn't work because it takes, I want the experience to be one that's rich and one that will kind of, they'll never forget. They will learn it. And also, I would love to be able to cultivate um, students who are from the community, who look like the community, who understand the kind of the cultural aspects of it. So there's some intentionality around who we, bring to the table, um, that's important to us. So I think, we have a great start, but I think we can do much better in terms of the lessons learned. How do we take, you know, um, the work that we're doing? How do we monetize it? How do we even tell our story? You know,
Mhm.
it's those kinds of things that I'm looking forward to, and I would love to see cultivated a little bit more.
Okay, so I'm hearing that there's some great ways to partner to bring specific projects to light, like
Mhm.
the app, but also it's challenging when you don't have internships last the amount of time that allows not only for the student to have the best foundation of learning, but also to be able to provide a lot of not only input, but maybe I would call it sweat equity into pushing these projects and initiatives forward.
Yes.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
Mhm.
Shasta, would you like to chime in?
Sure. Just two brief examples. One was in partnership with University of Chicago's Crime and Poverty Lab to implement a randomized control trial that was looking at. It was supporting this targeted intervention that was looking at men at acute risk for gun violence victimization and perpetration. And essentially, what we were trying to determine was uh, is our praxis that we follow for 18 months going to ultimately um, have a consistent and reliable impact on the population we were looking to serve, right? So that was the overarching piece. So that was a whole. There's a lot big story around that, but at the end of the day, I think the RCT was important because as a practitioner, you want to know if your stuff is working or not, and oftentimes we don't get that window until the end of a project when someone's picked it up and tried to evaluate it or whatnot, and by then it's too late. You need that information to make adjustments in real time to support people through their journey. The other I would just highlight was with city colleges, and I don't think it's not well known that the persistence rate in college for African Americans and Latinos is very low. So the amount of time that folks are staying enrolled in school beyond, up to 2 years or beyond 2 years is very low. And oftentimes it's finances, but other times it's a lot of the social stuff that gets in the way that makes it difficult to stay engaged and learning, especially as an adult. And the partnership with City College is one of the, I think we both came with humility from the City College's side. They said, look, we've got an issue with persistence. We are serving a demographic that appears to be a very similar demographic to the one that you're serving in your programs. And for us, the men in our program, uh, something like 80%, it was like 79% of our program participants, and you're talking 2,000 individuals, hadn't made it past their sophomore year in high school.
Mhm.
And the what and 60% of them are fathers, right? And so when you're looking at a situation where they're trying to better their lives, because they weren't attached to any formal institution that was, again, pro-social, um the skills you acquire each day staying in the gig, you know what I mean, and working how to navigate around a supervisor you might not like. They didn't have that, and so when they're coming to interview for jobs, it was hard for them to articulate their value in a traditional sense. And so we knew we needed to level them up. And so City Colleges, helped us see a number of adult learning pathways that were viable pathways, meaning the barrier to entry was low, and there wasn't going to be a lot of hiring discrimination on the back end, after they got certified. And so the digital manufacturing (CNC), I think is the certificate it's called, has been a huge hit. There's a very strong director there now, Oni Riley, who's head of workforce over there, and she's doing her thing. And her leadership is allowing for the partnership to flourish, because at the end of the day, no partnership is designed with all the stuff in mind out of the gate. And so if you stay involved and trust in each other and what you can bring to the table, you can amend the partnership. And so we've seen a lot of that population go through that program. And conversely, a lot of the students that were enrolled in city colleges that are having issues with persistence are now being paired with case managers. And these are so the part of what they're looking at is, how do we intercept and prevent a student from dropping out of school because of some issues that can be managed with a connection to some resources. So anyway, those are two big ones involving colleges that I'm proud to talk about.
I'm excited to hear that. I wasn't aware of the certificate program, but I think that's huge.
That is.
It is huge. Atara, would you like to share some of the successes and challenges you've had working on this issue with colleges and universities?
Uh, yeah, I'm gonna throw in institutions too, other than
Mhm.
colleges, like just working at violence prevention agencies as well, and theories around practice and why we do this work. Sometimes they're not in alignment. Around like what the goal is for the larger community of people who are working there, and even the larger community of people who we serve. And so I mentioned earlier, I had a chance to work at Ceasefire. I've worked many places, engaged in violence prevention, but at the time we were there, what we noticed was that the employees, the young men who and women who went out and did violence interruption were only being paid $40,000 a year. And their salaries were being cut randomly, or they would go on seasonal layoffs. Well, when you're pulling in millions of dollars, why is that happening?
Mm-hmm.
And so, and then you expect a level of performance, a level of commitment when we've had people be shot on the job. So what was the quality of health insurance? When we arrived there, no one had enrolled in educational programs who worked there. If you worked for UIC, why aren't you going to school for free?
Mm-hmm.
And if you need to level up, why aren't you being introduced to opportunities at city colleges or at Loyola, which has a robust kind of outreach program for people who want to go to college, believe it or not? And so my response to that, when I look at this, is our commitment has to be education, experience, and expertise for the employees, or people who do this work every day, and for the people they also in turn serve. So my lens is really from my first lens came from an interrupter standpoint. People have been in their life who are now credible supporters around like life change and all these concepts. So when we started to look at education as a value from that, I think we have a lot of current leaders. Chico Tillman, uh, Johnny Page at Contextos, Tim White, David Rivers, all people who have achieved bachelor's, 3 of them have doctorate degrees. And they are actively making change in communities. When we think about, well, what spaces do we feel like need to educate? That comes to universities, that comes to institutions where you work. And it also comes to workforce development, which has been clearly explained already. And I think when I think about universities and the work I've done with universities in the past, we're not there. So, we've got some interns, but our interns need to look like the people they're going to serve or have some understanding of that. We also, they need to be let into the institutions, right? They need to be, of course, viable candidates, but it was important that people who were doing this work were also able to go to UIC. And there are other programs, there are urban core programs. So if we talk about North Lawndale has an excellent partnership with Public Allies, where education happens, where we take youth who have these backgrounds, right? It was a program created by Michelle Obama, which had like defunded 2 weeks ago, and then we were able to find some more funding, right? Got completely wiped out. But we were able to get the young people back to work within a week. But when you look at these models, what they're doing with North Lawndale is they are saying, hey, you're a part of the North Lawndale Scholarship Program. You are from North Lawndale. You go away to college. Some of them come back to us and work for 2 years as an intern or 1 year as an apprentice. They go into a non-for-profit and they work there. They may work for alderman, they may work at Office of Workforce Development, they may work at a university. They can work in any number of institutions within North Lawndale. Some people work as doulas. I mean, there are a variety of experiences. And then when they return, they are also placed in a position to, so in that time they've been gone, they've learned how to work communities, learn what fundraising is, learn what social enterprising is, learn the challenges. Well, this year they learned the challenges of being completely defunded. And then how do you secure that funding, right? They learn the power of advocacy. They learn how to write white papers and different things. So they learn many different skills. And then they're going back to North Lawndale to work in agencies or work in other parts of their community or work elsewhere, but they've been deeply entrenched in what it means to be engaged in civic engagement, community participatory practice, and working at an organizational level. So to me, it's what we got to get is that we need people in these institutions. If you're doing research with us, how do you do research with us when nobody looks like us? And we set the table for universities to research in our communities. And who owns that research when you're done with it? Like there are so many pieces that we have, but I think education at these universities is also important. I need an intern, and I've got several great interns from Adler, actually, at Public Allies. But they came ready and interested in the work and willing to learn about the populations they were going to serve. And they were willing to do everything they could to get that information and to be in partnership before they executed the ideas. And that's what I think we get right, what I've been engaged in that's effective. And I think what we need to demand more of when we look at partnering with universities, but not just universities, other institutions as well.
It sounds like what you're highlighting is that equity is an essential part of any component of violence prevention, especially as it pertains to young people. And by equity, where is the access that Black people, Latinx people have to be not only students at institutions, but also people who can be employed at institutions who are doing violence prevention with a living wage, with some guarantees, with essential benefits. So it sounds like you're making the point that, and you correct me if I'm wrong, you're making the point that equity has to be at the forefront. And the only way to get to that is by this foundation of community engagement and co-architecture. And I think I like this term that you use, and I use it also. Earlier, you said, Chasta and Deborah, you talked about zooming out and looking at the entire ecosystem. And when we look at something like the school to prison pipeline, highlighted by Marion Edelman, what does the school to workforce pipeline look like in communities that have the most um, not just gun violence, but the most blighted, which is a correlation with gun violence oftentimes. And so, in order to have this large zoom out moment where you're looking at an entire ecosystem and you're trying to look at, well, what are the kinds of structural changes that need to happen? There must be some intentionality around inclusivity. There must be some intention around, well, what has been the historical inequities that contribute to these factors of violence? And how does that affect every generation of children coming out of these neighborhoods? Is that what I'm hearing from everyone?
Yeah, it's pretty accurate.
Okay. I want to switch gears a little bit. Oh, what did you say, Deborah?
You're a great listener and synthesizer.
It's that, being a therapist helps. It does. And some of us get trained very, very well. Um, I want to switch gears a little bit and ask in particular around police, because I think all of us, because all of us are social workers and we've had our own encounters with police, not only on a personal level, but oftentimes social workers interface with police, sometimes more acutely when it comes to something specific that's happening at one of the organizations that we worked at, or in a home of residents that frequent community-based organizations or institutions that we worked at, but also sometimes as it pertains to programming or programming that we're putting on in the community. So, as it pertains to police roles, we often think about safety or lack thereof as it pertains to gun violence. And I've noticed that we don't have the same policing engagement that we've had in the past, where officers had relationships with community members. How is this impacting our ability to collaborate to solve problems like youth being introduced to guns, using guns, and being killed by guns? And I'd like to hear your thoughts, Deborah.
I'm thinking I served on the police accountability task force
Mm-hmm.
when that was when Rahm Emanuel had put that together. And I'm just
Mm-hmm.
thinking about some of the real gritty issues that we were struggling with, and that the CPD was struggling with. And one of the things that was really clear to me and to others there is that um, the new hires are being put in communities that are foreign to them. And so there's this whole cultural competency issue that comes into play. And not that they don't want to be police officers, but they're operating under kind of what they've been told about a people, whether it's Black people, Latinx people, a set of assumptions. And it almost puts both of us in an adversarial role, in a very challenging role. So that was one of the big issues that we talked about, and around kind of the training that went on with particularly the new force, the I forget what they call them, but the new police officers that are coming on board, and really revisiting that. It was kind of too prescriptive and not real, not in terms of the real world kind of what they're going to be challenged with, and understanding the nuances in different communities. And so we had put forth a set of recommendations to kind of to help address the concerns that were expressed at the task force. I do believe that it has not gone as far as it should, and which is why we're having some of the issues. And being a police officer is not a how can I say, to me it's not a sought out career at this point.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what you guys think, but I don't, I remember growing up and the boys would be playing cops and robbers and all that stuff, but part of it was they're wanting to be a police officer. There wasn't the office when I came up, it was years ago. You have the officer friendly. They were in the church, in the school, church, everywhere. You don't see that anymore. In some sectors you see it, but you don't see it as kind of the culture of the police department. And part of it might be because they don't have enough officers, period, filling these vacancies, and that's a big issue. Um, that's a real big issue that we don't want to go to police folks in a harsh way, but folks need to feel safe.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
that's just my opinion on it.
I appreciate you mentioning that. I do recall an officer coming to my grammar school and not only talking about safety, but also talking about positive relationship building with police officers. And I don't think that happens anymore.
Yeah, it's rare. And
Mhm.
I hosted a meeting with the district police officers. This was some years ago, and I'm like, no wonder these officers are doing what they're doing, because the leader was a jerk. I
Mm.
can put it. He was a jerk
Mhm.
and very judgmental, very harsh and things like that. So if you're getting it from top down, imagine how they're they're treating the people, or particularly our young person. One of the hardest things, I'm a parent, I have a son, and I don't know about you all but if I get a call from my son, my first reaction is, are you okay?
Mhm.
It is not where, how are you doing, blah, 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 blah. It is, you get into this protective type of mode because there's fear around harm being done, not just around the everyday people, it's the police, you know? Um, and I hate feeling that way. I hate feeling that way. And I know that I've talked to some of my friends and family members, and they feel that way. And it puts you in a very, very kind of, I don't know, it's hard. My grandson lives out in the south suburb, and when he's just learned how to drive the car, and I'm like, don't come here,
Mm.
and we are all tracking. We got trackers on where he is and everything, and it's just because we want him to be safe. And having to have those uncomfortable conversations around and preparing them. If you get stopped, what do you do? How do you handle it? All those things. So
Mm. I noticed that you were nodding your head as well, Tara, specifically about having a son, but what are your thoughts about the impact on what policing looks like now to address this problem of youth being exposed? Uh-oh, did we lose her? It looks like we lost her. Well, I'll come to you, Chaz, then perhaps she'll come back. Maybe she had an internet issue. But what are your thoughts on the way policing looks now as it pertains to how to address young people being exposed to guns, using guns, and being killed by guns?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just start by saying I'm not qualified to answer this question in the way that someone should be taking what I'm saying and trying to apply it in any way. Not an expert in this space. I'm somewhat jaded, being a black male in this country. I mean, I'll say, being raised in Phoenix, Arizona, the relationship with police were very different than it is here in Chicago. I mean, it was more like just an adult professional that you didn't know, but that you knew was trying to keep you safe.
Mhm.
And there was kind of I mean, I was a young man heavily involved in gangs coming up, and we actually had we had the DARE program, um,
Yep.
Mhm.
and but that's drug resistance. And I remember at around 11 years old, I had just gotten jumped into this street gang, the Crips, and we were growing around North Central Phoenix, and we grew so big that they installed a GREAT unit, which was Gang Resistance Education and Training, which was like a sister agency to DARE. Anyway, even then, I mean, they knew that there was a gang issue in the school. They were certainly monitoring, activity. But even then, I remember, being called into the office, and they thought I was some leader or something like that. And uh, the relationship wasn't what it is now. It wasn't like I'm gonna take this young man in the office, I'm gonna rough him up, I'm gonna force him to say something so I can get him locked up. Or it was none of that. It was more like, okay, well, look, here's what we know. This is what you're telling us. We're gonna call your father, right? We're gonna let
Mhm.
him deal with this, and that's how it got handled, right? And so, I mean, I've had a ton of interactions with police back then, and it was very different. Well, when I was 18 and left home and came, to Chicago, uh, by 19, I had my first terrible interaction with police. And I
Mhm.
mean, I could have been scarred, had I not been raised in a certain way. And I've had to absolutely have the conversations with my boys about interactions with the police. It's one of those things, it sucks. You don't want to taint your child's vision about what this world can be and how beautiful it could be for all of us and all those things. No, you got to have very specific conversations about how they're going to treat you and see you as a black male, right? That sucks. And for me, I had to have for my 19-year-old, I didn't have that conversation with him until I don't know, he was in his, I would say, well, he was in his teens. Um, but my 11-year-old, I had the conversation with him when he was 7. And I remember, I never forget, because we all, I would take him out. I lived in Woodlawn for about 4 years, and um, I would take him around and we would practice situational awareness. Like, what do these boards
Mhm.
mean? What do these people mean? Why is there eye contact? What does that kind of eye contact mean versus that? You know, uh, when that police officer stopped, and this is where it kind of started, it hit me in my stomach, is I would reframe for my son the interactions I would have with cops that were clearly had an issue with me and my blackness, right? Like, they had some attitude, questioning me, all kind of stuff. And so I had to reframe that to my son, like, oh, they just want to make sure we're all safe, son. And, it's like making excuses for this bad behavior. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
And I remember, though, distinctively walking around, and this was, separate issue. And I'm like, man, I don't know if I'm gonna be alive, right?
Mhm.
Before he gets old enough for me to really be able to have that conversation with him. So I got to have it now. I got to start planting the seeds now. And as he's older and asking me questions, hopefully I have the gift to be able to contextualize it. But I remember having that conversation with my 7-year-old child, and I just saw his eyes like open up, and he was kind of looking differently. Like, it just, for me as his father, it felt like he was looking around and go like, "Am I safe?" Like,
Mhm.
his whole construct had been flipped a little bit. Like, these people who are supposed to keep me safe may not actually want to keep me safe. Like, what does that mean? You know what I mean? So it just,
Mhm.
that part. So that struck me, Devin, when you were talking about that conversation and needing to have those. But I mean, if I was to offer something beyond my emotional piece, I would say, being involved in the policy making around police is very important. Um, at all, having youth and adults, elders, all
Mhm.
contribute to policy making that is actually enforced in policing, I think, is really important. And I have seen youth, um, their perspective of police become altered when they are engaged in the youth council, for instance, right? So
Mhm.
I've seen that the positive effect it can have, but you're talking about a very small percentage of the population who have that opportunity. And I think because of the level of distrust, mistrust in institutions like policing, you could be a part of creating some of the greatest policy the world has ever seen, but your lack of trust in that institution and it being able to carry it out and self monitor is at an all time low. And the fact that we've got, everybody lives on social media and we've got all these phones that can chronicle the real interactions that citizens have with police, it's at an all time high. And I think that
Mhm.
is part of the issue, and it's hard to combat that. You can tell your kids or your neighbors whatever you want, but when they see Black lives taken by police officers for stuff that we know, people of other ethnicities, they'll get a slap on the wrist. They certainly won't lose their lives, and they won't. they won't get shot multiple times in one encounter for something so frivolous, but anyway, so I started by saying I'm not qualified because this issue is raw for me. I think it's eroding our country, and I think too many people have gotten away with really bad behavior, and in a profession that's so important, so anyway, appreciate the question. Sorry I couldn't be more helpful in terms of a response.
Oh, no, I think it was helpful, and I think that the importance of this question is to provide context to another layer of the wicked problem, because we're not gonna be able to police ourselves out of a wicked problem like youth and gun violence. But police are part of the stakeholder group that we need to address it, and police are also sometimes bad actors as it pertains to this wicked problem. And all of that context is important in the exploration of this, especially as it comes when it comes to the anchor strategies and solutions and projects and initiatives that you all are talking about. They're not without some scrutiny or some need of involvement from police. And when we think about community structures, we have to think about what is the relationship with police. Hence the question. And so I don't think that you're unqualified. I think that the context that that everyone is sharing, and I'm going to come to you, Atara, is important to examine as it pertains to what do we need to be looking at to get as close to a resolution of this problem as possible. Atara, what are your thoughts?
Um, I think as having three uncles, three brothers, three sons, having had a son who has been jailed, having had some challenging experiences with police in my older years. So my young years were I had the officer friendly. That's how old I am. Um, we had officer friendly. We also had the drug police officer come to our school and show us real time videos, which is why I never used cocaine or heroin or any of those pictures were real. I mean, they were just on point. I was like, oh, not me, right? Very real context. But I think when I think about what happens, I'll start with, what we get wrong. Um, I have had to put my physical body in front of one of my children when a police officer drew a gun on him. We were playing Monopoly in my house all night. Like we are all night Monopoly family. Like if we doing Monopoly, we doing it all night. If we doing beer whist, it's all dice. Whatever, it's all. We don't have any like sense of ration when it comes to games. And he was going to the car to grab something that I left in there. I think it was a pot or something, so I could make something. And he stepped outside, and it took him a little too long to come back. And I walked to the door, and he was standing there with his hands up, with a police officer's gun drawn on him. And he was like, I'm just coming outside. Like he just kept saying, I just got outside. And I ran in between him and the gun. And I was like, my son just came outside. And all the while I'm saying, Marcus, get your ass back in the house. Excuse my language, but that's what I said.
Mhm.
Um, and we got out of that particular situation. And I don't know if I had any rationale. I didn't have any sense. I've also sued the police officer, the police department has successfully won because they came on my property and shot my dog. Um, um, I was racially profiled when I went to the University of Chicago by U of C police while I was a student there, accused of they had seen somebody stealing cars and they thought me with my take home food in the car and my books perhaps had stolen a car or two, I guess, in between studies. Um, and those things happen. They happen often. And I've had to train sons. And I've also, been, pulled over. And unfortunately, all the faces that pulled me over were not, you know, other racial faces. They were people who were my color, but not necessarily my kind.
Mhm.
Um, and so those things are awful, and I don't forget them. And for my children, especially my son, the violent loss of his dog at an early age, and to have that happen to him was very, very difficult to overcome. We spent lots of time and energy trying to normalize his life after that experience. But what I do see happening, um, that has been right. And I can't believe I'm saying this. It's crazy.
Mhm.
Um, I had a chance to do a lot of work with the third and fourth district police department in the years that Vanessa Wesley was there, and also working with Mark Payne. And we had a chance to do this kind of project where you're talking to police officers about their concerns.
Mm.
And I remember sitting at the table with this police officer, and he was tall. He just seemed so damn mad and disgruntled already. And I was like, why is he here? Lord, this is not going to be a good experience. Um, and the concerns that he expressed about what was happening on his shift, what was happening to the people he saw, were heart wrenching. He articulated his concerns better than I could have articulated my personal pain. And then we went around and I met other officers who felt the same way, but also felt trapped in their work. And
Mm.
felt like for homeless people, for people who were mental illnesses, they didn't have another place to take them. They didn't have a respite. And for some
Mm.
of the young people who are getting in trouble, there were programs, but some of those programs they felt weren't functional programs. Like they would see the boys right back outside the next week going, no, man, let me tell you what happened. And so there was a familiarity with they weren't removed from the things that were happening. And that just opened up my sense of humanity, not necessarily when I'm getting pulled over, but it opens up my sense of awareness that um, there are police officers, not just black and blue, but women and people of other ethnicities that who are struggling with these same questions. And I feel like many of them work, like we did the peace circles, we did some smaller projects. A lot of them will sign on to volunteer at Inglewood and some of the parks we have. They give their time. But I don't know if they feel safe in their environment to articulate what they would like to see happen.
Mhm.
And so that was another layer of them, of realizing that, I could imagine that they feel unsafe, but talking to people who wouldn't necessarily articulate that, but their words would say that's not just something that's acceptable. And then having done this work, I also know that training does happen. I've seen some changes in training in terms of responses to domestic violence that have been more positive. I've seen a more friendly pullover strategy if there is one, right?
Mhm.
I've seen better de-escalation responses in some of the arrests that I've seen on my block in Inglewood. Where police come and are trying to address young people. I've seen a de-escalated strategy where an officer approaches, right? And if with a supportive team. So I've seen some of that is better. Um, but I haven't seen the return to youth programming, and that is what we had hoped would happen when they stole took $95 million from the CPS department to build the $95 million police institution that was supposed to be built. And once they took the money, it was never built. But we had hoped that we could use those resources to create a bridge, some of that money for education for people of color, marginalized populations to be brought into um, um, programs and projects where they could learn more about the fire department and EMTs and police officers and one-on-one programs and support systems and engage more in communities, right? Like use that center as a hub to create other resources in the community. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. I think what we could get better is the relationship between um, police officers, and community policing work for us. We did know the policemen in our community. I don't know what the safety measure is for that now. And I think we need more. I don't know if we need more in number of police officers. I don't know if policing is our issue. But I am happy to see more Black women specifically within the police department and more women in general within the police department. But a lot of recruits do not come from Chicago, who are othered, who are not Black, not identified as what do you call it? Non-Black, Hispanic, but white. Euro-Americans, a lot of them do come from outside of the Chicagoland area in recruitment in surrounding suburbs, even other cities. And I think that's also a challenge to our culture because you can be trained within the police department, but you learn the breadth of what you do by your field supervisor. And so, so a lot of that learning around um, a lot of that training around what it means to be respectful in communities, to understand communities gets lost sometimes in field supervision. And so that's it. That's what I get. Sorry about that.
It's okay. No, I appreciate. I think the question itself does bring up a context that we don't often talk about when we discuss violence prevention, but we have to talk about police. We have to talk about um, the role of other institutions like public schools. We have to talk about all of these structures that are part of our systems that create safety or have a role to play in safety as it pertains to this wicked issue. Um, for this particular segment, I noticed that we've had specific discussion around some, it sounds like foundational anchor strategies. One being this community engagement and co-architecture. Two, this zooming out process of looking at an entire ecosystem to look at how systems integrate. And I think you pointed this out, Miss Wesley, about, well, how do we pull in everything to completely wrap around a community? Because we have a tendency to work in silos. So behavioral health is over here, the trauma unit is over here, case management is over here. But really, every community member needs a multidisciplinary approach, not only for surviving, but healing and thriving. So there are these themes throughout our conversation this afternoon that I think are pivotal. My last question to the panelists for today is, where does higher ed come in these anchor strategies? And there was already one um, particular point made about what happens with research. Who's collecting the research? Who has an opportunity to access the data for the purposes of zooming out, looking at an ecosystem and planning for surviving, healing, and thriving? And then who owns the research? How would you suggest that higher ed play a role in these anchor strategies? Sounds like foundational anchor strategies that you have noted today.
Well,
Let's start with you, Ms. Deborah.
yeah, I'd like to say that there's been a lot of pushback from the community about research, um, feeling that, particularly from the large academic institutions, that they take information about us and they get tons of money, but what happens after that? That they don't feel that they benefit per se directly, maybe indirectly. And so there's been this, and I've been in meetings where, community members, leaders have said, no, I'm not going to participate. So one of the things that we've said is we've got to, and there's been an interest in training community individuals to do their own research, to be a participant in it, and in partnership with the academic world, setting rather, because folks are feeling very comfortable with saying, not me, not now, not ever, And so there has to be a sense of transparency on this, and how and bring the community to the table in the beginning, and how this information can lift up a community, lift up their lives. When, as you were talking, one of the things I've sat on the city's community safety council, And one of the things that and usually when the meeting starts, they give all this data about what's going on around the violence and where it's happening and everything, and the age range. And one of the things I noticed, and I asked the question, how many of these individuals that have been perpetrators, if you will, of the violence are parents?
Mm.
Because I noticed that, and we've noticed at Sinai, that the kids are with them in the late at night. And should we do something about it? You know, because think of this: if these, and it might be something very simple, and we've actually started a program around that, is understanding what is going on, and do they understand what parenting means, and how the child needs to be at home, needs to be in the bed, those kind of things. But we have to kind of take the judgment out and understand what's going on. That and it's childcare. It's like those very resources that have been taken away recently contribute to some of the issues that are going on that we see, and our children are seeing this going on, and this is what they see, and then they say, well, if I see this is what I can be. No, so I really think that we collectively are in a position to and particularly from a community point of view, is to have those uncomfortable conversations. The other thing that I did a couple of years ago is have a series called Uncomfortable Conversations
Mhm.
around equity and particularly racism, because a lot of the board members, and I'll say Sinai, don't look like, or didn't look at that time, had no kind of lived experience or understanding of our community. And so we had these conversations between board members of major institutions and the community. It was one of the most powerful dialogues around this. I saw both on both sides people in tears, both community members in tears around how decisions are made where they're not a part of this, right? And the same thing is where you have board members who want to help but don't know if it's making a difference. And so I wish I had more funding. I didn't, but it was a great conversation around it. And I think that there's the opportunity um, from a lived experience, from a kind of a learning opportunity around each other. Because think of this: some people go in their little comfortable homes and they don't see what we see who live. I live across the street from a park. That was one of the reasons why my parents bought the house that I live in now, because I bought it from my father, because of the park. The
Mhm.
park is not an attractive feature any longer. It used to,
Mm.
you know, it used to be. And that's sad, because to see kids playing and knowing how to interact, because far too many children are on their phones, right? Playing games and not interacting with other folks. And so to have this kind of space for our children to interact with other and learn how to communicate face to face and play and those kinds of things. So I just think, and I forgot what your question is at this point, but
The question is about, what does higher ed need to do as
I
it pertains to these anchor strategies that you all have named?
you need to bring the community into the conversation, into the
Mhm.
kind of what you want to do, and um, how they can be an inspiration and a part of the solution. They are. I mean, you want me to apply what you say I need to do. I need to understand, kind of through your lens, and you need to understand through my lens, that type of thing. So I think it's incumbent upon us. And the final thing is, when I first joined Sinai and I sat at the table, and because and I'll be honest, we're a Jewish organization, have Jewish roots. There was this assumption that we sit with a ton of money. So when I would go into a meeting, they're like, oh, how much money can I get? I was asked for $1 million. And I'm like, are you crazy? But
Mhm.
that that being said, is that there is a great opportunity to bring the community. And I used to sit there and I said, I'm a part of this circle. I am not the center of the circle. I'm a part of it. And so I've been very intentional about how I present myself. Because Deborah, don't have all the answers, but I do have the will and the passion to help the community come up with whatever it's going to work and get the resources that it needs collectively. So
Mhm.
say that.
So what I'm hearing from you is that higher ed needs to do a better job of community engagement and co-creation.
Yes.
Okay. And Chasda, picking up with you, what would you add to that in 1 minute?
Well, give me 1 minute. No,
We're almost out of time.
I think Deborah hit it on the head. Number one, the joining, so being in the community. There are a lot of tables where community organizations are assembling and creating joint plans. Oftentimes, you don't see colleges and universities at those tables. United Way funded over 10 years ago a lot of these quality of life plans and have now created this culture of organizations um, wanting to form various councils to work on these, various problems that they all share. And again, colleges and universities are not at that table. I think the other thing, and so that's easy to find, easy to to get a seat at that table. The other thing I think is one that's like more common sense. If you know that you know um, uh, post secondary education has been sold, bought by many folks in the community, and it has not led to them graduating, A, two, getting a job, right? Then it would behoove you to change your strategy or add elements to be a little more successful with the group that, you know, um, is the reason you exist. And so simply what I would say is invest in a pipeline that connects students to the trades. The reality is we've had a lot of smart people like W.E.B. Du Bois and Booker T. Washington give us all these ideas about what to do with the most talented 10th. The reality is folks don't read, they don't do the research, and we're constantly, cycling the same old solutions. And, I think if we just did a little bit of due diligence, we could create a path forward. So in short, the biggest problem that our youth are having is getting an apprenticeship to get into the union. Well, universities create a pipeline to not only allow for these youth to pass the test to get into the field, but bridge a connection to the apprenticeship, to the folks that are the card carrying members who can grant apprenticeships, just like you do for work study, offsite work study opportunities. Real simple. And I think you would attract a lot of folks back to these universities that have not had people in their family graduate from college. It is a daunting thing to go to a big, ivory tower that you've never been to, right? You're looking at shoes, you're looking at backpacks, everything but the classroom. So I think that's what you need to. That's a area I would say invest in and open up. This is a personal. Open up makers labs in schools just for the community to come in and workshop these ideas. Right? Use the printer, the whiteboard. Use the facility to invite the community into the solution. Because if you saw where they're meeting, luckily the libraries have community space. But imagine if these beautiful institutions would open up their space and not be so afraid about the folks that can't meet eligibility criteria to gain admittance into the school. You're going to see that you're going to create pathways, and you're going to actually be probably taught a thing or two by folks, because there's wisdom in the collective wisdom of people. The more people you get around a problem, the better your solution. So anyway, that probably a minute and a half.
Absolutely. So I'm hearing a couple things. We still have to answer this question around who owns the research that is conducted in our communities, and what is that data used for in terms of this zoom out and looking at how do we create surviving, healing, and thriving. I'm also hearing colleges and universities are not sitting at the tables in community settings of community-based organizations. So there appears to be a lot of distance in relationship building. And likewise, colleges and universities don't have physical space in which community members can engage in. And there needs to be more of a connecting pipe between what you gain in school with more options inclusive of trades and moving into the workforce. Atara, anything to add in 1 minute?
What both of them just said, and I want a training institute for researchers from the community. During COVID, I taught 10 young people research strategies and how to do outreach in public health systems. We got we got the highest number of people vaccinated within the near South Side compared to the whole entire city in terms of African American communities. And so, with everything else they just said, that's it.
And
And
so,
yeah,
inclusive of a training institute, which does not have the eligibility criteria of being a student, but a space for learning for anyone in the community. Is that what you're saying?
that's fine too, but they have the eligibility to be a student. If they can do
Okay,
research, they can be a student. I went to U of C. You've taken many good, yeah, it's not.
agreed.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. This has been
Mhm.
quite a lively discussion. We are at time, and I'm really appreciative to our panelists for today, Ms. Deborah Wesley, Chasta, and Atara. I appreciate everything that you've shared both personal and professional regarding this wicked issue of youth and gun violence. And I hope that our audience today has gained some knowledge as well as perspective and inspiration from everything shared. This will be posted. You'll be able to review this webinar again at a later date once it is cut and put on the YouTube channel for Campus Compact. Thank you again, everyone, for coming. And again, this has been quite a wonderful discussion this afternoon. Take care, everyone.